The story as told by Evander. My grandfather, Jimmy, was driving through the European mountains with his wife Betty in his old car when the engine died in complete darkness. Just then, a man in torn clothes with a cold face appeared and directed them towards the Blackwood Manor hotel at the bottom of a dark valley. Betty told Jimmy she didn't trust that man. When they entered the hotel's shabby lobby, they saw an extremely thin, pale woman standing motionless in a shadow, just staring. The hotel owner, Mr. Victor, greeted them with a lifeless smile and exaggerated kindness. The room they were given was cold, damp, and foul-smelling. The wallpaper was rotten and peeling off the walls. Betty said in a trembling voice, "Jimmy, I can't stay here. This room, it's alive." Jimmy, who now had a bad feeling too, promised they would leave early in the morning. At midnight, the sound of nails scratching on the wooden door woke them. Jimmy turned on the light. The sound stopped, but on the floor, right behind the door, lay a clump of long black hair, completely wet, as if freshly dragged from somewhere. In the morning, as they prepared to leave the hotel, Mr. Victor was behind the reception desk with the same smile. He said, "I'm sorry, the roads are blocked due to a rockfall. You must be our guests for at least another night." When Jimmy insisted, Mr. Victor's gaze turned cold and empty for a moment. "The safest place is right here. Outside is more dangerous." Throughout that day, they occasionally saw the strange woman at the end of a corridor or behind a window in the backyard. She never spoke, only stared. That evening, Betty got lost in the hallway. Jimmy found her beside an old locked door. Betty, pale-faced, whispered, "There's crying coming from behind this door, a woman's voice, and a child." The nightmare began. At midnight, the sound of a woman and child crying came from behind the wall. A shadow crept under the door into the room. Betty screamed. Jimmy, with his old soldier's instinct, realized it was a trap. In terror, they escaped through the room's back window, which opened onto a cage of dead roses, and threw themselves into the absolute darkness of the forest. They ran until their lungs burned, finally reaching a dirt road where, by sheer luck, a freight truck picked them up. A few days later, in a safe town, they reported their story to the police. An armed police unit went to inspect the hotel. What they found was a nightmare that stayed with my grandparents for the rest of their lives. When the police entered the hotel, they saw a scene that shook even the most seasoned officers. They arrested Mr. Victor and his wife Eleonora in the large, dark kitchen while they were emptying a large barrel. Its contents needed no further explanation. The sweet, sour smell of death hung heavy in the air. The police investigation peeled back the horror layer by layer. At the trial, held months later in the capital, horrifying truths were revealed. Number of victims. Facial reconstruction and examination of missing persons records showed that this couple had subjected at least 17 people to a horrific fate over the hotel's 40 years of operation. Some victims were solitary travelers, others were young couples like my grandparents. Motive and beginning of the crimes. In their strange and confused defense, Victor claimed they started this not out of hunger, but for purification and absorption of vital force. He had confessed in a hidden notebook that in his youth he had been drawn to mysterious quasi-mystical schools and came to believe that consuming the flesh of impure humans would make him and his wife strong and immortal. Eleonora, who apparently suffered from severe mental disorders, whispered in court, "They used to cry, but then they fell silent forever and became part of us. It was the only way not to be alone in these mountains." Method of operation. They knew exactly which roads to sabotage and on which stormy nights to offer help. The old gramophone was just one of their tools for psychological manipulation to break the spirit and confuse victims before the final hunt. The court, after hearing all medical and psychiatric evidence, which confirmed Victor's full sanity but deemed Eleonora to have degrees of insanity, issued the verdict. Victor Blackwood was convicted on 17 counts of premeditated murder with horrific circumstances and sentenced to death by electric chair. The sentence was carried out 6 months later in a prison in the capital. Newspaper reports said he stared into the officer's eyes until the end with that same fixed, empty smile. Eleonora Blackwood, due to a diagnosis of severe mental illness, was exempted from the death penalty, but sentenced to life imprisonment in a special asylum for criminal lunatics. She died 20 years later in her solitary cell. Nurses said that until her last day, she talked to the wall and was afraid of the night guests. The Blackwood Manor Hotel was demolished and razed to the ground by court order, and its land was salted so nothing would ever grow there. My grandfather would always fall silent after telling this story, and his eyes, one clear, would stare at a distant point in his memories. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of history, he would say these words, pausing on each one. My child, the world is full of old legends about werewolves that hunt in the darkness. But I tell you, the most terrifying monsters are those that have no need to change shape. The ones who come to you in daylight, dressed as humans, with clean shoes and seemingly clean hands. They open the door for you with false kindness, serve you with a smile that never reaches their empty, cold eyes, and use your suffering and helplessness as the first course of their feast. Never forget the lesson of this story. The most frightening prisons are not those with iron bars, but those whose walls are built from trust, and whose locks are smiles, for which you are never given the key. Be wary. Sometimes a false savior is more dangerous than any honest giant on the road. Then he would pause for a moment and continue, looking deeply into my eyes. And remember, when your instinct screams, "Get out of here," never, ever betray that inner voice, for the sake of politeness or fear of causing offense. Sometimes the only difference between life and death is a timely "thank you, but no." And that was the true story of the Blackwood Hotel, and why my grandmother feared dark windows and mountainside roads for the rest of her life.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Please support us by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Sincerely, we are not alone.